Well, now that we've gotten you here to this beautiful little village of Pentwater, Michigan, let's find out what there is to see and do. Mike Castor is with us. He's the president of the Chamber of Commerce here. Mike, what I've noticed is that everything is very close to the marina.
This place is really close. Whether you are walking, whether you're on your bicycle, it's just easy to get around, and you know, our town is compact. Bed and breakfasts close by, good restaurants close by, unique shopping, and of course our beautiful, beautiful waterways. It's just a great place.
Let's take a little tour around the downtown area. And with us is Dean Gustafson.
Dean Gustafson.
And we're standing in front of, as a matter of fact, the store that your family has owned now for 2 generations.
We've been in Pentwater for 2 generations since 1948. We started on the other side of the street, but have been here since 1967.
And I understand, Dean, that is kind of characteristic of a lot of the little shops that are along these few blocks that form downtown Pentwater.
Pentwater is characteristic of a true mom and pop type of community. We just kind of stick together, and there's no big companies that own these stores. There's all families.
And quite literally, Mom and Pop Gustafson own this store. and a lot of the other stores around here are owned in that same way by people who are families who brought this from generations through.
That's true. There have been some come and gone over the years, but we always see that same pattern re-emerging every spring. There's a few new faces.
I've also noticed that you really take a lot of pride in the buildings that you have here that are authentic buildings that have been around for more than 100 years. I've seen markers on the buildings.
Yeah, a fellow in our Historical Society started that project a number of years ago. He just passed away last year, but that was his baby. And he researched, I think, over 170 homes and business locations in town to determine when they were built, and Bug Squire was his name.
In August, we have a homecoming celebration. And homecoming, like so many things associated with the schools, there are so many people that have been here over the years, and they like to come back. And Pentwater is always welcoming people back.
When did this place become the kind of tourist location that it is now?
Well, that started in, I believe, the 1890s. There was a couple associations formed and started building cottages, and especially after the lumbering and canning industry went out, that became about the main industry left in Pentwater.
Bob Maynard's Gun and Coho shop in Pentwater is not your typical sporting goods store. Maynard, who's more commonly known as Coho Bob, has literally filled his tiny shop with guns, hunting supplies, and fishing equipment.
Some people say it's unique. My wife has a different bunch of words she uses. We just better use unique, I think.
Customers have grown to count on Maynard for more than just sporting goods. He has a radio direction finder on his roof that he uses to guide lost boaters, and he also has a reputation for knowing where the fish are biting.
So many times it's people who have been here before or their friends who have been here. And they say, hey, if you want to find out what the wind is or how the fish are biting, call Coho Bob. He'll tell you.
But in 1920, his daughter, in her parents' name, gave 13.7 acres, or roughly the first 600 feet north of the channel, for a little park. But many of you know, remember, in 1922, the state took that park from the village. And from 1940 to 1950, it became a very popular park. It was very small, and the attendance was approaching 200,000, which would have been much too much for that park. And the state was urging and pushing everybody to purchase the next 900 feet or so along the beach, Baldy and Frog Pond, and where the tents are now. And then we get to kind of a cliffhanger. In 1951, it's recorded that they were discussing this property with Miss Mears, and at one time she made the famous remark, standing looking at the beach and the people in the bathing suits, get the nudes off the beach. I mean, there was nothing the state park could do about those bathing suits. It was a bathing beach. And that's the way it remained until 1957, when she died, and bang, that 34 acres came up for sale. And the Parks Department, because they'd not had any kind of a substantial discussion with her, you know, keep the naked people off the beach, it's not going to ring in Lansing and get you any money for a park. So they couldn't do anything, and they worked it out with Mr. Shimke. They worked out a deal with him for the village to buy it. The village actually put $5,000 down as earnest, what I would call earnest money, and proceeded as quickly as possible to get a bond issue out. They bought the property for $15,000. Can you imagine that? 15,000 bucks. They bought it and leased it to the park, and the park in a couple of years then was able to get the money through and bought it. If Miss Mears came back an August afternoon now and she looked at that beach, we'd be swimming at Bean Street, I'll tell you. Our speaker tonight is Arnie Samuel.
In 1951, Ginny Brickbill was a lifeguard, and she was a redhead with lots of freckles, and it was a very hot summer, and she got so sunburned the doctor said, you got to get off the beach. And I had been hanging around on the beach for so long, they asked me if I would take over for the rest of the summer, and that was how I began my career with the Department of Natural Resources. To back up a little bit, some of you may have wondered, how did this guy ever get to town? My mother was born on the Adams Farm, north of town, by an area that many of you know as Cabin Town. At one time in 1940, I believe it was, I was related to everyone from Latin Road to the Pedersen gun shop. Everybody on that road was either a distant cousin or something of my mother. She was a Peterson. My first trip to Pentwater was 6 weeks old in the front of a 1933 Chevrolet in a bassinet, and my father never let me forget it because a bassinet scratched the dashboard. My first year at the park, we had a manager by the name of Chadwick, and I believe it was Wyman. I'm not sure about that. He and I were the only two employees at Mirror State Park. We had one old truck, a little building at the entrance, which some of you may remember, a little white and green shed at the entrance, a storage shed to keep things in, and some hand tools. At that time, it cost 50 cents a day to camp at the park, and the electricity was free, if you had a long enough extension cord, because I think there were only 3 outlets in the whole park. And this part about Carrie Mears, I can vouch to that, because she used to come down to the park once a summer, early in the summer. Bert Kuhn was her chauffeur. He would drive her up to the middle of the park by the concession stand, and in case you didn't look at this, this is what it looked like. This was drawn by an artist that I don't know who he was. He just came in one day, parked his van, and drew this and gave it to me. And she would park right down about where that vehicle is in the front of the concession stand and look at the beach. Bert would get out, he'd come around, open the door so she could see better. She'd look out, and like she said, she'd say, "Too many naked bodies," and away they'd go. That was her checking it out. She did that, I think, 3 or 4 times while I was there. The park at that time was totally in what we now call the picnic area. As you drive down Lowell, there's that picnic area where the sand is now getting 4 feet deep instead of street level. That was the campground. You came down to the park, just before where we turn in now, that nice 90-degree corner, there was like a turnout. You just kind of went off on a ramp into the park. You went past what is now the contact station. The road turned to the left around the outside of the toilet building that's there, and joined up with what most of us now use for our sunset walk in the front. That was the road. There was no parking lot. You parked on both sides of that road. That was all the parking there was. You drove down to where the end of the road, where the turnaround is now, and you made a left and went back out of the park. When it came time to write permits for camping, you didn't go to the camp office. We came to you. That was great. The rangers would write the permits in the field, because the rangers learned very quickly the best time to write a permit is at dinner time. At that time, our campers were basically all families. The same people came. You would say, okay, it's the second week in July, so-and-so's coming this week. They all came at the same time, and it was a family camp. We didn't have much trouble. After Carrie Mears died, they had a latitude and longitude survey, and that read that the boundary of the park ran 600 and blah blah feet west, turned north 90 degrees to the water's edge. And the water was down at that time like it is now, and the water's edge was someplace up near Manistee. So they had to redo that. I hope they did anyhow, or we're still in trouble. After they built the back end, we got this nice gravel parking lot. The biggest flat area in the county for the teenage driver. And we had a couple that would come down there and do donuts at night and dig up this nice gravel parking lot. It wasn't blacktop like it is now. And we couldn't catch them. And I believe it was Walt O'Donnell was the manager when this happened. He and Don Lamb staked the parking lot out one night, and they caught a kid. Don told him, "We're not going to give you a ticket. You return tomorrow with your mother and your father, and we'll talk this over." And he came down with the boy, and he told the parents, "We will not write your son a ticket, but he must come down and rake the parking lot from one end to the other." The catch being, and I got in on this because I was the ranger that had to do it, when he comes to a car that's parked, he will stop until they can get the person that owns the car to move it. He won't go around anything, he won't go past it and come back. It took him 2.5 days. And he told me when he was done, "I will never do that again." We got a young ranger named John Wagner. He came and was freshly married, brought his wife over to the park, and he was working there. They were going to camp out for a couple of weeks in a tent, and he left the light on in the tent. And the light tipped over, hit the side of the tent, got hot. Subsequently, the tent caught fire. In order to get the tent fire out, first thing you do is cut the tent down, get it on the ground, get the air out underneath it, which Leo knew. He was right on top of this. He and somebody else are cutting the tent down. Frank Steiger picks up a 5-gallon bucket, or somebody else picks up a 5-gallon bucket to throw on the water, throws the bucket, tent drops, Frank Steiger's on the other side and gets the bucket of water. They did get the fire out, however. This is why Leo and Frank were never on the fire department. You had a problem, everybody stepped in and helped. Shortly after we got the campsites, somebody came up with the bright idea that the park should close at 10 o'clock, like they do now. Well, that's great, except we've got a big oval. You know, so everybody drives the oval all night long. So the manager at that time said, well, that's all right. We've got these big telephone poles. We'll build a gate. So we built a pole, put a pole on this side of the road, pole on that side of the road, telephone pole across it that swings like a gate. Took us 3-4 days to put that pole in, get it all painted with stripes on it and everything. First night we close it up and we lock it. We come back the next morning and one of the town fathers had spent a night down at Billy Gray's and had gone down to check the lake, turned the corner, and promptly planted his grill into that pole. The gate was never closed again.
What about the aleways?
Oh, the aleways, every day. Every day, myself and 5 prisoners in the tractor, and we would pick up fish from one end and go back and start all over again, all day long. Fish got so thick that we couldn't haul them out. We buried them at one end of the beach or the other. Just buried them up.
How long did that go on? How many years or how?
It was 4 or 5 years. Bill Pops would loan us his, on holiday time we would do this, rather than wait for them to wash in. When we knew we were going to have a big crowd, Bill Pops ran the bait livery downtown, would loan us his 1,000-foot net, and we would put the minnow seine, and we would put the prisoners out in the water and go out in as deep as they could get with this seine, go around them and bring them in to get them out of the water before the people got there. It was horrendous. The aleways were just terrible. Yeah.
Whatever happened to the frog pond?
Because the frog pond was right where the shop building is now, back against Old Baldy. That sits right on top of it. When they were building the park, the construction company went to fill the frog pond in so they could make a foundation for that building. It took them 4 days using a 10-yard front end loader, bucket after bucket after bucket, and it was only about 15 feet wide and maybe 90 or 100 feet long. It was very deep. I know, like you, everybody said it was bottomless, and it sure had a bottom a long ways down because it took them a long time to fill it up.
Looking at the Gustafson Gift Building, which is 3 stories high, Masonic Lodge, Sally Dix. Up the street here is Birdland Hardware and the Ellen Rehnquist Building. I'm standing in front of where Chet Eisenhower used to have the Standard Station. I thought it'd be interesting, as long as we're talking about things that are old, we're going to take a walk in the Masonic Temple. Coming in the door now of the Masonic Lodge. Here's our waiting room that we come into. Comfortable chairs to sit on. Here's a bulletin board that Stanley Baker, our secretary, keeps up with all the latest. Now we're coming into the lodge room. And this room is filled with furniture that dates back to 1895. Black cherry wood with blue velvet soft cushions. These are the globes, pillars that we use in our lodge work. And this is where the senior warden sits. Junior deacon sits there. And our past masters date back to 1864. Some served a couple years, some served a couple different times. Myself, Bill Duncan, was master in 1963. I've been in the lodge since 1951. This is 1993, so I have 42 years in this lodge. Here's a kind of an old picture, 1955. There's Paul Goodwin, Ed Chimke, Harry Rollinger, Clyde Kuhn, Steve Ben Pelt, Myron Myers, William Allen, Kenny Sims, Charles Frank, oh that's Louis Frank rather, there's Larry Frank, Harold Shaw, and this one here we haven't identified, but he was in our lodge at that time. Here's our altar with a Bible that dates back to the 1870s. There's the organ that Dan Baker plays for us. Like I say, our floor is really a wool carpet that we removed from the upstairs of the Gustafson building. We used to own the top floor of the Gustafson building years ago, and about 1961 we moved down here to do our lodge work. We're actually 128 years old when it comes right down to it.
This town and this house behind us really represent one of the key factors to this area's history, which is lumbering business. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, Charles Mears was one of the early lumbermen in Pentwater. Came here in about 1855, built a mill just down this way from us, and a boarding house, and eventually a store and hall. And the early foreman that he hired to run his operations here built the house in back of us, Henry Flagg. He came from Massachusetts also, as Charles Mears did, and was Mears foreman for quite a few years.
It was, in fact, in this historical home in 1982 that a group of Pentwater citizens met to talk about a better way to gather, preserve, and promote the unique history of Pentwater. Around the dinner table sat Harold Shaw, Betty McKee, Tom Sturr, and Norman Kuhn. From all different walks of life, they all had a big goal in mind: to form the Pentwater Historical Society. By November 29, 1982, the Articles of Incorporation were filed by local lawyer Larry Konopka. With momentum strong, membership drives were held. The fast growth of the Pentwater Historical Society spurred the need for fundraising. The first of these dinners was held at Nickerson Inn and cost only $6. In April of 1984, when Pentwater Historical Society asked members for suggestions for a logo, the ship's wheel was submitted and chosen by the Publicity Committee. The society began by displaying artifacts at the Village Hall and on a table on the street during the annual homecoming festivities. But this was not sustainable, as the generosity of the community in donating artifacts made the need for a permanent location essential. Art Squires led the charge for finding a suitable space. In 1985, the old police station, which was in the basement of the community building at 327 Hancock, was used as a home for the Historical Society. On June 15th, the doors were opened to the public to view the historical pieces of Pentwater in one place. Over time, the tiny basement space ran out of room to display the many artifacts that were donated by local citizens and obtained by the Pentwater Historical Society. In 2011, after considering more than 8 properties, they found the perfect location that would serve as a home for both the society and the museum. It appeared to be a match made in heaven, as the building was a genuine historic site, the First Baptist Church. Being on both the church committee and the board, Ed Bigelow was instrumental in bringing the two sides together. Fundraising began with weekly work sessions, sometimes as frequently as twice a week. Extensive work with a parade of volunteers began to transform the historic church into a vessel to preserve, present, and promote the history of Pentwater. Finally, the museum was dedicated and the doors were opened for the first time to the community, surrounded by a huge celebration. In keeping with the Society's original vision and goals, Pentwater Historical Society continues to educate the community through our newsletters, historical publications, programs like Guide by Cell, architectural walking tours, historical talks, history cruises, and historical events like open houses and afternoon teas, and involvement in community events. Fundraising has always played a big role in making the day-to-day runnings of the museum possible. Our annual spring and summer dinners with presentations about historical events and people featuring guest speakers have always been a huge success. Pentwater Historical Society is always looking for excuses to get together for fun events. After 40 years, the Pentwater Historical Society and Museum continues to grow. Artifacts continue to be donated. History continues to be recorded. Visitors continue to visit. Momentum is high as we forge into the next 40 years with an idea that was shared years ago around a dining room table. We think the founders of the Pentwater Historical Society would be proud of the direction and progress of our organization, and we hope that future generations will be proud of the strides we continue to make in preserving, promoting, and presenting Pentwater history.